From the studios in Joplin, Missouri, Good News Productions International presents Venture in Faith. Outstanding Christians of our generation telling their own story of how God has worked in their lives. Your host, Boyce Moten.
Our venture in faith today is with VIF Dittemore. She's 79 years young and gave me permission to tell you her age. 8 years ago, I did a radio interview with Isabel, and I was so impressed with her story that I called over to the facilities of Good News Productions International. At that time, the ministry was just getting into videotaping, and I said, would it be possible for me to do an interview on video with a missionary who has been over 40 years on the mission field in Asia? They graciously consented to give that interview, and at that time the Venture in Faith series had not yet begun. And that interview was called Good News Magazine. The scriptures use the Greek word poema only 2 times. It's the basis of our English word poem. It's found in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, where it is translated as made. The invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. Well, that refers to the universe which God created. But the word poema or poem is also used in Scripture to refer to the new creation. In Ephesians 2:10, it is translated as workmanship, where the Scriptures teach about the new creature in Christ Jesus. We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. Enjoy with me today the workmanship of God in the life of Isabel Dittemore. Isabel, your maiden name was Maxie, and many of our viewers will recognize that name immediately. Tell us about your family.
Well, my father was a preacher for 51 years. His ideal was to be a preacher for 51 years because Asa Maxie, who he was very, very desirous to be like, his grandfather, preached for 51 years. He was the first Christian church preacher in Kentucky. And it was strange that he just preached exactly 51 years and then died. So he got his wish. But he also raised 8 children. And all of us, as far as he was concerned, were raised to preach the gospel. He told us so. He said, you don't have to do it, but that's why you were brought into the world. And so if you don't, you'll be a great disappointment to me. And so all of us tried to get out of it. But we couldn't be happy any other way. So he had his way with us, except one brother. One brother did not preach. He felt like he had too sarcastic a tongue, so he shouldn't preach. And he died young at 42, so he's been gone a long time. But he was named John McGarvey. And Father was a great admirer. In fact, he was a student of John McGarvey for 10 years at Lexington.
And the Maxie family has had a ministry that has literally encompassed the world, hasn't it? Through the training of preachers and being on a mission field.
Yes, I suppose you could say that. None of us ever think about ourselves as that way, but Victor has been working at Cincinnati Bible Seminary all these years, and Brian has been a preacher, and Tibbs started the College of the Scriptures to train black preachers, and Mark has been in Japan for 37 years. So I suppose it's kind of worldwide.
Did you have a lot of missionaries and preachers in your home while you were growing up?
Oh yes, we surely did. And I think that's very much what influenced me. I can remember different ones. I remember a Persian lady that was a nurse, and she took care of my mother when Mark was born. And she used to give Persian meals, and the tablecloth was laid on the floor, and I served them walking around on the tablecloth, serving everybody my stocking feet. And I just loved that. And she taught me a Persian song, which I sang for Children's Day, and just all of that kind of thing. I just loved it all. And I can remember all the missionaries we had. I can remember all of them by name, and I loved them all very much. So it wasn't really surprising for me to become a missionary.
Someone said to me just yesterday that they were telling me about someone who had raised a Christian family, and they were asked, what is the secret of raising a Christian family? And in addition to going to church and reading the Bible in the home and so forth, the mother responded in this way: I cannot think of a visiting evangelist or missionary that we have had in our church in the last 35 years that I have not invited into our home.
Yes,
and I thought that was a very simple thing, and yet very profound, because when we sit around a table, as the two on the road to Emmaus sat around the table with Jesus, somehow we see people in a different light around a table.
That's true. That's true. We do.
But at the age of 5, you had already decided that you wanted to be a foreign missionary.
Well, I don't know if that's when I accepted the Lord.
I see.
But and it was, my father was still preaching at that same church when I met Dr. Shelton, so it had to be within a few years of that time.
Dr. Albert Shelton, a very famous missionary to the China-Tibet area, was killed
later
on the mission field.
Yes.
A martyr for the cause of Jesus Christ. Did that scare you in those early years?
Well, no, I never ever thought of being scared. It never occurred to me to be scared. I have been scared a few times on the mission field. If we were starting across an area that I knew people had been robbed because it was barren and the people would have guns. And so we always kept a gun, and we always shot it off before we started across a stretch like that. All of us missionaries.
Just announcing, I'm here.
Yeah, announcing we've got a gun.
Yes.
But we never ever had to use it.
We're supposed to be wise as serpents and harmless.
Harmless as doves. So we never ever used it, but we just let them know that there was one there.
You didn't have to use it as long as they knew you had it,
that's
perhaps.
That's what we figured.
But the Lord is our protection too.
Yes.
And down through the years, I know that you have felt His protection. You even wrote a book called He Leadeth Me, an autobiography. It's available through College Press if any of our viewers are interested here in Joplin, Missouri. Isabel, I want to hear a little bit about the way that you initially went to the mission field. You were how old?
Well, I was 27 when I first went. But when I was 17 and a freshman at the seminary, I wanted to go then. And the faculty and the nurses conferred, and they said, no, you're too young. Either you ought to be older or you ought to be married. And you shouldn't go if you're not married. Well, that was fine with me. I didn't care to go if I wasn't married either. But, and I realized I was just a freshman, and I needed a lot more training if I was going to be a missionary. So that didn't upset me too much. But everybody knew then that I was going to be a missionary, so that was, if any fellow dated me, he knew what he might be getting into. So,
Isabel, there may be some young woman watching this video who is engaged to a man who doesn't want to go to a mission field. You had that experience, didn't you? A man who initially wanted to be a missionary and then changed his mind.
Yeah, and then he changed his mind. And so, then that can happen, of course.
It's not easy at the time.
No, it's not easy at the time. But if you really feel that the Lord wants you to go, that won't stop you. That won't stop you.
Someone said a blazing inferno seems like a small flame when you're 50 years removed from the heat. And I think that's true, that you must have cried many tears as you thought about your future. You were in a sense married to Christ, committed to a mission field and your fiance says, no, I am not going to the mission field?
Well, I cried many a tear over him because I was engaged to him for 6 years. And he was in Europe and I was in America. And it's not good. That's not good. It wasn't a wise thing at all. Every other letter we fought and every other letter we made up. Well, you know, life's not going to be like that all your life. It's too bad.
God was leading you. That was the very thing you wrote about. He leadeth me. And God was giving you day by day, moment by moment guidance.
That's true. That's true.
Now, when you decided prayerfully to go to a mission field, and you're not necessarily recommending this for others, but you put out a fleece. What was that fleece?
Well, I had 3 things I wanted the Lord to let me know. First of all, how the family would get along, because my brothers next to me were all away in Bible college, and the family needed my income. I had a very good job, and I'd been getting a raise every 6 months. That was what scared me. I thought, now I'm getting so interested in this job that if I don't go pretty soon, I'm not going to want to. I'm going to lose my whole desire to. And so I asked the Lord if he wanted me to go. First of all, he had to ask, the Morses had to ask me. If they still wanted me, they had to ask me. And secondly, I had to know that the Lord would see that the family was taken care of. And thirdly, I had to know that,
You had to have the money.
I had to have I had to know that he was going to provide my money. And I asked him, the way I wanted him to tell me was, I had been invited to speak the next Sunday, and I needed a suitcase. And I went down and priced them. And I said, I've got to have that much money by Friday so that I can get my things packed and leave on Saturday. And Friday, that amount of money came. So that was my answer. That was my...
All 3 of those. The Morses asked, your family did not object. That was one of the things they'd been praying for, is that God would use you in his ministry. The money came in, not a lot of money, and this
just $5, but
this may be surprising, you know, to our viewers, that if you're going to start downtown, you don't wait for all the lights to turn green at the same time. You just take those green lights one at a time.
That's right.
And I think throughout your ministry, Isabel, you had the experience of starting out with just not enough money, and then when you get there, somehow the money miraculously comes in.
Yes, it's
God
really...
is faithful. He said, I will never leave you or forsake you. He keeps his part of the bargain, doesn't he?
But he wants you to take the first step. I mean, he wants to see you really mean it and you really are willing to do. Otherwise, don't expect him to do it all.
I have to say something that means more to me than it does to Isabel, but I think I have every tooth in my head. I had a wisdom tooth pulled one time that got abscessed, but all of that. I've gone to a lot of expense with crowns and so forth to keep my natural teeth. And this woman, when she was 26 or 27 years old, had every one of her teeth pulled. They weren't bad, but she was going to a part in the, well, as far away from civilization as you could get, 700 miles from a doctor or a dentist. And a predecessor on that mission field, J. Russell Morse, virtually died from an abscessed tooth, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He
took
had
him
to be
2.5 or 3
stretcher.
months to get out of the mission station where he was. They were
Yeah, they were
35
clear to Hong Kong.
clear to Hong Kong. They were 35 years without even a wheeled vehicle of any kind, not even a bicycle. And this woman meant business with God, said, I am going to the mission field. She had all of her teeth pulled before going to the mission field. And that may not mean much to you, kiddo, but it means a great deal to me. And I know the Lord appreciated it too.
Well, I had bad teeth anyway.
Oh,
I
did
really
you?
had to go to the dentist a lot. And I knew that it would just be a hectic time up there.
But
And
you
I'm
didn't
telling
have to
you-
have them pulled, and you wouldn't have had them
No.
pulled if you were in the States.
No, I wouldn't have been in the States, of course not. And people in America thought it was crazy, absolutely crazy. The people where I worked, you know, they just couldn't believe it. And
But you did it for the Lord.
yes, I did it for the Lord, and that's the only way in the world I'd have done it, because I sure didn't want to. But you know,
God
actually,
honors that kind of faith, I think.
Yes,
the
I think he
commitment.
does.
Whether anybody else understands or not, I believe the Lord understands.
And I'm telling you, when the people up country had bad teeth and had toothache and just cried with the pain. I felt it was right to have done it. They should have done it too. You know?
And that was what year? Around 1937?
Well, I went out in 37, yes.
You went out in 37 to the mission field.
Well, I went in the spring of 37. I left home in 36, and I had my teeth pulled in 36.
And you remained on the mission field for one term. And
Yes.
then the war broke out.
Well, I got home before it broke out, just before. In fact, our ships were blacked out a lot of the way home because they expected the Japanese to bomb them anytime. The war, you see, the Japanese ship Tatsuna Maru was not allowed to land in San Francisco while we were on the Pacific coming to the Pacific coast. So we felt like war was going to break out any day.
Those were very volatile and difficult times,
yeah, it
weren't
was
they?
really. We were so surprised, everybody on that ship, that the war didn't break out sooner than it did.
Now, when you came back on that furlough, God provided you a wonderful husband.
Mm-hmm.
Would you tell us how you met and how you went to the mission field together?
Well, we met at a North American Christian Convention. That's a good place to meet, you know. But I had heard about him before. I knew that he was planning to go, and I'd been very anxious to meet him. I was teasing Melba Palmer about him, but I stopped as soon as I met him. And I really felt like a ton of bricks, but I knew that I was 7 years older than he, so I was very leery, very not at all sure about whether it was a good thing to do or not, but I just left it in the Lord's hands. And I already had three. Let's see, Lois and Jane and Dorothy Sterling. Yeah, I had three girls his age that were going to go back with me. So, you know, he asked me one time, isn't it strange that for me to be going out there with all these women? Well, I said, 3 of them are your age. All the time I was home. But anyway, it worked out that he fell for me. And
He chose the best one.
I wouldn't say that, but anyway, he chose me. So, but anyway, he also was concerned about it, and he kept on until he found out how old I was. And then he came to see me on my birthday.
And proposed.
No, he didn't propose then. But my brothers, I had threatened all of them what I'd do to them if they told him how old I was. And they just made life miserable for me that day. I'm telling you, they came as near as they could to tell him without quite getting there. Like brothers, well, and he knew all the time. He wrote back to me as soon as he got away, and he said, I knew all the time how old you were. So.
It was a very happy marriage, wasn't it?
Very, very.
A lot of hardships, but a lot of
We lost
happiness.
a little boy, you know, our first year, and he was just 3 months old when he died. But it was because of a bad fall I'd had, and he had lost, he only had half of one lung. And so he could hardly stand to be
Warren was a
outdoors.
farmer,
Warren was a farmer.
and he decided he just couldn't be happy farming. He had to preach.
Yes, that's what he
And
told
his
me.
father said that he had been dedicated as a minister
From the time he was born.
from the time he was born, but he didn't know that.
No.
But God knew it.
And
So-
God takes it, you know. You give God a gift, he takes it. If you dedicate your child, you can be sure he's going to do it. The Lord's going to see that he does.
And Warren was a very courageous man. There had been 2 previous missionaries from Kansas who had died
Yes.
on the mission field.
And in fact, he said himself he was going to be the 3rd one.
And he was.
And he was.
Isabel, I know it's difficult to talk about it, but I think that there may be some widows or someone watching who could profit from the courage that you manifest under times in such stress as you faced.
Well, there's one thing I want very much to say, and that is I don't want anybody to get the idea that my husband died of typhoid because he was not inoculated. That isn't true. He was inoculated before he left, and then his passport was stolen and everything else except the suit he had under his pillow from the train that he was on in India, and he had to be inoculated again. And Americans did not know. Even American doctors argued with me that I was incorrect, I was wrong about it, but the British doctors told me. And later I found out that the American doctors learned in the Vietnam War that the British doctors were correct. That if you're inoculated for the first month, if you are in a dangerous place, you'll get a double case. Because the inoculation does not take effect for a whole month. Well, during the Vietnam War, America learned that that was true. But before that, they would always argue with me. But afterward, they would not let anybody go overseas for a month after they'd been inoculated, because they found out that the British knew what they were talking about.
So he got sick.
And of course we didn't know either. And we didn't have antibiotics then either. We didn't have penicillin or any of the antitoxins. So he went over, he was inoculated again because he was going over to an area that was full of typhoid. And you see, that was the worst thing in the world for him to have done, because he was doubly dangerous. It was doubly dangerous for him. So he got it over there, and he had a very violent case of typhoid. But his bowels were never perforated. So it was just exhaustion that killed him. From
How long did he live after he came?
When you get typhoid, at the first day of the 5th week, you will die unless you pass the crisis safely. The crisis is 3 days before that. If you do not pass that crisis and your fever continues to go up, you will die the first day of the 5th week, and that's when he died.
So he lingered over a month.
Mm-hmm. He died in August.
And you were with him at the time
Oh, yes.
he passed on to be with Christ.
It was a very beautiful, beautiful scene, because it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, but the room was, of course we didn't have electricity, we just had a candle, but the room was just lit with a light shining onto his face from the ceiling. Just a beautiful ray, and his face was just beaming, and he said, "Oh, if I could only sing the beautiful songs they're singing. So beautiful." But he had his throat full of that typhoid scum. He couldn't get a sound out. And he said, "They're calling me." He said, "I hadn't meant to go, but they're calling me." And so I talked to him, and I told him that I would go over. He had been, all the time he was sick, he was kept wanting me to put his shoes on, because he'd promised to go back and hold meetings in the Mekong Valley. And he kept wanting me to help him get ready. And I told him I would go and hold those meetings that he'd been wanting to hold. And he nodded his head, and I said, "Weeping endures for the night, but joy comes in the morning." And then he was gone. So I felt that I had to carry on. I never even thought of not carrying on. Never occurred to me. And the people loved him very, very greatly. And we had a tombstone put over his grave. And his grave looks out. You can see miles and miles up and down the Salmon Valley. And we put on the grave, "He being dead yet speaketh." We had a cross, and that down in the center in English, and on each side, once in Chinese and one in Lisu, said the same thing. And they tell me that to this present day, the people have kept that grave beautiful.
And there have been many, many people die as martyrs who saw that grave.
Yes, and they said they gave him the courage to die for the Lord, his grave. So he had to go, for their sake too. We needed that grave there, for the sake of all the people who've been killed for their faith.
And the grave of your husband was a monument of courage to them.
Yes, that's true.
A poet said, "My life is but a weaving between my Lord and me, and I do not choose the colors, for he knows what's best for me, for he can see the pattern from the upper side, and I can only view from this, the underside. Sometimes he weaveth sorrow, which seemeth strange to me, but I will trust his judgment and work on faithfully. 'Tis he who fills the shuttles, and he knows just what is best, so I will trust his judgment and leave to him the rest. And not till the loom is silent and the shuttles cease to fly will he unroll the canvas and explain the reasons why, that the dark threads were as needful in the skillful weaver's hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern that he planned." Isabel, you're not bitter at all that God took your husband.
Oh no, I know
It's a
he's
part
in
of
heaven.
his plan,
You know,
and
he's happy up there. I know.
you had lost one child, but you had Janet.
But he has that boy. You know, that
Yes.
makes me very happy that he has him up there.
And
Because-
you're happy for your daughter to be a missionary, as you had been a
Oh,
missionary
yes,
before.
I surely am.
She and her
And
husband.
she is so happy too. She is just really, you know, the Lord has blessed Alan and Janet very, very much too. And they have 6 children, which makes me happy because that gives me 6 very
Precious
wonderful grandchildren. And
But you had to leave China eventually, didn't you?
yes, we all had to leave China.
You were a widow with a child to support, and God led you to a different mission field, Japan. It was a
Yes.
short while after the war, and it was a very important ministry. You stayed there 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Characterize for us the 10 years of ministry in Japan.
Well, I had radio on my mind the whole time I was there because I'd been sold on it while I was home on furlough, and I took a course at the University of Tulsa in radio, and I really worked on it because I was really anxious to do that. And I felt like you could reach a lot of people, and I felt like if I could get onto it, maybe I could beam back into China. You know, you could beam a Chinese program back. And so I prepared Chinese programs even while I was in Japan too. But I remember one particularly thrilling experience in Japan was going to a leprosarium. A number of leprosariums were listening to our programs. And these people invited me to please come and see them, so I went. And I was, there were a lot of them were blind. Of course, lepers go blind quite easily because they lose one limb after another and one of everything after another, you know, just little by little, and they lose their eyesight. And in the church service, they were all reading. They had asked me for Braille, for the correspondence course in Braille, and a girl from Tokyo had written to me just shortly before they asked that and told me that she would like to put my correspondence course into Braille because she had some time right then, and she had all the equipment for it, and so she had done it. She put it all in Braille. I didn't know when I'd use it, but boy, right as soon as it was ready, these people wanted it in Braille, and to this leprosarium, and we sent it to them. So they invited me to come, and to my great surprise, in the church service, they had their hymnals, and of course it was all in Braille. They would lick up a line and then sing. Lick up a line and sing. That's the only thing they could feel with was their tongue. They had the very first thing they lose is a touch in their fingers. And they couldn't, the only way they could read was with their tongue. And it was very, very precious to see those people. Real Christian people too. They were wonderful people. And happy people. They were just as happy as they could be because I came to see them. They were so grateful. And I talked to them all around different places, and I'd ask them all kinds of questions about, their life there, but they were just as happy as they could be because they were Christian people, and they were so glad to take that correspondence course.
In the world we have tribulation, but be of good cheer, the Lord said, we've overcome the world. So
yes.
While our outward man perishes, inwardly we are renewed every day.
That's right.
From Japan to Taiwan, or Free China,
Yeah.
for 18 incredible years.
Well, I loved Taiwan too, because of course these people were Chinese, and I could talk to them in their own language, but also they spoke Japanese, because they'd been under the control of Japan for 50 years. And they were all very friendly with Japan, and that's why the Chinese were so afraid of them. They really were. They wouldn't let any Taiwanese have an office, and never did until just the last few years they finally have some Taiwanese.
The people from mainland China, you mean?
Yeah, they came over, took over the island. They would not let any Taiwanese hold an office because they were afraid that they would rebel against them, because they were so friendly with Japan.
There's been a tremendous revival that has broken out in mainland China. And I like to think, Isabel, as I know you do, that the radio broadcasts and the Word of God, which you planted in the hearts of millions of listeners, is now beginning to bear fruit.
Yes, I hope too. And of course, Far East Broadcasting has been working very, very hard for that. And I worked with them trying to get, and so did Charles Selby, trying to get a spot in the Philippines that was being right into China. And they have it. And Charles is getting a radio station built now. They're going to be putting things on.
One of the things that you specialized in, stories for children. And those little children have a way, I saw tomorrow marching by on little children's feet. They have a way of growing up, don't they?
Yes, they do. But, older people like children's stories too. And I felt like it was just as good a way to reach older people as children. I wish you could hear one of my programs. I played one for the women at College Heights, the last meeting, and they were quite surprised. They really enjoyed it because not only we told the story both in Chinese and English.
I see.
And then we taught them a song, and Alan was teaching that one, but all the different ones took turns doing it. He'd teach them, sing it first, and then teach them phrase by phrase. He'd sing it, and then I'd play the piano for them, the rest of them would sing, and then he'd do the next phrase. And then they'd all sing it together. Every program, and we'd use the same song for 3 programs. So we were on the air Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So we had 2 songs a week. We taught them all. And it was just the radio station just loved it. And they said everybody liked it. They just begged me not to go off when I did. But I said, I just can't carry on anymore. And all of the different missionaries had said they would carry it on if I had to leave, but nobody did. So I just had to go off. But really, it's radio, of course, and now television just seems to have taken over everything anyway, everywhere. So I figured that it had probably spent its...
But the story is still being told. I'm reminded that the only time we have record in Scripture that Jesus wrote anything, he wrote it in the dust.
Yeah.
And the message that you have written has been written in human flesh, which is like the dust of the earth, animated by the breath of God. And so the stories are living on and on and on. And like the words upon your husband's grave, he still speaks, and you still speak, even though you're half a world away from China.
Well, that's a nice thought. I'm glad you said that.
Well, we think that something's permanent, like the Jewish temple. The Jewish people thought it was permanent because it was of polished marble, and they'd worked on it from 19 BC to 64 AD, and it was almost like one of the wonders of the ancient world. And Jesus looked at that and said, no, that's not permanent at all. As a matter of fact, the days are coming when not one stone will
Will
be
be
left
left.
upon another that will not be cast down. And the little ragamuffin band of motley pilgrims lives on like a stone quarried without the use of human hands. It now has grown to such proportions that it fills the entire earth. It's a beautiful fulfillment of prophetic teaching.
Yeah, it is.
Isabel, we just don't have very much time. At the time has slipped right through our fingers. But I know that watching us today is someone, maybe a college student where you were 50 years ago, maybe a widow who has just buried her husband. And I want you to look into the camera. And I want you to give a heart-to-heart appeal for these people to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yes, if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, I don't know how you can keep on living. He is the only answer to all of the problems that all of us face. And it doesn't make any difference how big the problem. He knows the answer. He knows it. And nothing is impossible with him. Nothing is impossible with him. If you would just put your hand in his and ask him to take your life and make of it whatever he wants to do. And be willing to do it. Be willing to let him take your life and use it however he wants to do. He will take it. All you have to do is offer it, and he will take it. And in fact, if you don't offer it, there is nothing that anybody can do to help you. That is the only answer there is to the problems of this world. The only answer. And people who ignore it and act as if it's of small account are very foolish people. Our whole life is bound up in our Creator, and our Creator is Jesus Christ. He made us. He knows exactly how we're put together. He knows exactly what our heart is like, what our brain is like, what our body is like, what our problems are. He knows. And all you have to do is put yourself in his hands. Just put yourself in his hands and let him take over. And he will make everything work out together for good if you love him. But you've got to love him. You've got to love him, and you've got to know that he knows everything, and no one else knows everything. Only he. So you can trust yourself to him, because he not only knows everything, he loves everybody. That's the marvelous thing. He loves everybody. He loved us enough to die for us. And without his death, you have nobody that can save your sins. He's the only one who can save your sins and make you a whole person again. So commit yourself to him and be happy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.